Today's May 27th, 2021. I'm BrentNally, and I'm really excited to be here with a medical doctor and an awesome YouTuber that I've personally learned a lot from, Dr. Brad Stanfield. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot, Brent. Really excited for our chat.
Definitely me as well. So, Brad, you have a medical degree from University of Auckland. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And currently you're working as a general practitioner in your day job, and then you're a husband and father and also doing YouTube and doing it pretty well. How do you find the time to do all this?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're recording this at 5 a.m. So yeah, I work full time. So my day usually starts at the clinic from 8, finish at 5. And then I've got to try and fit YouTube and, being a father and being a husband and whatnot all around that. So yeah, it's a lot.
I'm a new father as well. My son, our first child, just turned 18 months a few days ago. So I share your challenge there. And it's been challenging to raise a baby in a pandemic. I wouldn't recommend it. There's that old saying, it takes a village. And we didn't really have much of a village because of the pandemic. But, I know a lot of people have been disrupted from it. So everybody's got their sob story on that. But how old's your child?
He's just coming up 6 months. So yeah, it was pretty tough for those first 3 months as obviously, life changes in a pretty massive way. So yeah, trying to keep this YouTube channel going during that time, trying to, work at the clinic. It's been a lot, but yeah, things are getting better now.
Okay, congratulations. That's awesome. So we're going to get into a few different things about your background, how you got into longevity, why you started YouTubing, how you think we can solve the human aging problem potentially, or if that's even a noble cause or a possibility at all, what your thoughts are on that. But before we jump into that, would just love to know, do you normally wake up at 5 a.m.? I'm really appreciative of you doing this, and hopefully the audience as well too. This is kind of a longevity and lifestyle question. Is that your normal schedule?
So I normally get up at 4 a.m. and that's to try and make sure that I've got time to actually get all of the things that I need to get done. So particularly around the research around each video. So I used to be able to publish 2 videos a week. Obviously with child and whatnot now, I can't really do that. So I'm down to 1 video a week. But each video, with the research and shooting it and editing it, it takes me about 20 to 25 hours each video. So yeah, to fit in that time, I do need to start my day pretty early. So yeah, this is pretty normal for me now.
Wow, that's really good information for me as a YouTuber personally. And it makes sense because from watching your content, I can tell the quality is very high impact, and you can tell you've done a lot of research on each video. And I like how it's really compact. Your videos are about 10 minutes or so. You always have the scientific references there. Speaking of that, everybody, in the description below, I always put timestamps with the show notes. So obviously subscribe to Dr. Brad Stanfield's YouTube channel. If you're not already yet, what are you doing? The link will be in the description below. Check out his content. I'll also have Dr. Brad Stanfield's link to his Twitter account. And, Brad, if you'd like me to put your LinkedIn on anything else in there, if you want to connect with people, we can do that. So whatever you feel is best.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah. So I'd love to learn a little bit about how you got interested in longevity. Did this happen before you started your medical degree, or did this happen along the way, or maybe even after you got your degree?
Yeah, so as a teenager, I was always very much into sports. I was always looking at ways to try and improve my athletic performance. So that's when I started looking into molecules such as creatine and whatnot. So that took up a lot of my time initially. Then I went to medical school and they started talking to us about telomeres and whatnot. But I didn't really pay that much attention to aging because I was still, in my early 20s at this point. It hadn't really occurred to me. And then when I started working as a doctor, I noticed a couple of lines around my eyes, and I suddenly realized that I'm starting to age. And what can be done about this? Because, we're in the 21st century. Surely we've got exciting methods that are promising, that are hopefully about to come out for humans that can extend our health span and even ideally our lifespan. So that's when I started looking into it. And I realized that a lot of the content out there, they focus in a lot on what petri dish studies are or what mice studies are, and they try and extrapolate that to humans. And I thought that wasn't necessarily in our best interest, because until something's actually proven out in humans, you shouldn't really be extrapolating it for our use. And there's been multiple instances where we find something that's really promising for mice, but it doesn't translate to humans. So a lot of time and money is spent, and a lot of stress for some people is spent trying to, follow these promising things in mice, when actually it's not going to give them any benefit. So that's why I wanted to start my channel, is to really focus on what the evidence actually shows, as opposed to, what other people's opinions are. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And from watching your channel, it totally makes sense. So again, I want to plug your channel and have recommend people check it out. To piggyback on what you're saying there, I see things that are like, oh, C. elegans lifespan has been extended 500% just by this one tweak of something. And it's like, well, they're very short-lived creatures, and that doesn't extrapolate. Humans are already very long-lived creatures relative to the rest of the animal kingdom, not including plants, but sentient life. So it's very hard. It's a well-known, understood scientific conundrum that it's very hard to extend that lifespan even further in the already long-lived species like us. So it's hard if we got a 500% gain on our lifespan by one tweak. That would be surprising, probably. Okay, so really great stuff, Brad. So you're currently about 29 years old. Is that accurate?
Yes, I'm 29. But on your point about how humans are already long-lived, so there are organisms out there that have seemed to have cracked the code, if you like, about longevity. So there's a species of jellyfish, for example, that they don't get cancer, and their cells are immortal. So they can continue living. Well, if you can call a jellyfish living. So I'm inspired by that I think potentially one day we can extend lifespan. And I'm really hoping to cover that research when it comes out.
Definitely. I think you're referring to what's called as the immortal jellyfish. There's been this Japanese scientist that's been researching them for like over 30 years. Some good documentaries about it. I'll link the Wikipedia article to it. But, there are some critiques on the immortal jellyfish. It seems to actually like basically reproduce itself to become immortal. So it's just kind of like rebirthing itself is kind of what scientists currently believe that it's actually doing. There's another species called Hydra. It is a multicellular species that seems to be biologically immortal, meaning that it shows no signs of aging. Researchers have been studying Hydra, and they can't find any signs of it actually biological aging, but there are legitimate critiques about this Hydra as well too. Translating that type of biological technology into humans to help us increase our health span and lifespan with Hydra. And Hydra is super interesting. I want more researchers to study Hydra because it can actually reproduce itself in many different ways and reproduce different aspects of itself. It can sexually reproduce itself. It can asexually reproduce. It can turn itself into like a hermaphrodite and basically like have sex with itself to reproduce itself. If limbs are cut off, it can regrow limbs. If a limb is cut off, then that other limb can turn back into itself and regrow. It has all these regenerative type of capabilities that are mind-boggling. And then just a few weeks ago on Lifespan News, I'll link there. We reported on a new study that came out about bigmouth buffalo fish. And I had never heard of these fish before personally, but the researchers studied bigmouth buffalo fish from age 2 to 102. And not only did the researchers not find any evidence of biological aging in these fish, but something even more miraculous happened, in my opinion. The researchers showed that these bigmouth buffalo fish, which are found in North America, I'll link in the description below, they actually showed signs of becoming more healthy as they got chronologically older, which to me is mind-boggling. So I'd love for the researchers to study that more. Have you heard of the bigmouth buffalo fish before?
No, I haven't. But that concept that I think you've touched on, where you can potentially replace some of your cells, if you like, that's the thing that I'm really excited about. If we can find a way to safely clear away senescent cells and then replace them with new ones, I'm really excited about the potential of that. There is a human trial, I think it was published 2019, I think it was, in humans, where they used Dasatinib and Quercetin to see if they could clear away senescent cells. And they did. The humans that they used had lung fibrosis, so scarred lungs, and they wanted to see if they could clear away some of these senescent cells from their lungs, would that improve how far they could walk? And they did get a small benefit. So it'll be interesting to see whether this theory of clearing away senescent cells will actually work in humans.
I completely agree. And Dasatinib or Dasatinib, I don't know. I think it's a difference in pronunciation between American English and like British or New Zealand, Australian. And then Quercetin. Those are two senolytics that have been studied and used with efficacy data for decades. So those are really exciting. There's some really good trials and research going on with both of those. But you mentioned replacing damaged cells or senescent cells is what you were saying with new cells. So I've heard of a book and we reported on it on Lifespan News. I haven't got to read the book yet, but I've watched a few interviews of this researcher, this Asian researcher. His name is, I'm going to butcher it, but it's Jean Hebert or Hebert. It's French. I think it's JeanHebert. And his book is called Replacing Aging. So what his basic thesis is that we should be able to replace every single organ in the body. And he educates people to let them know we've actually already replaced every single one of the 78 organs in the human body except for the brain. And that will probably be coming up soon. There are some medical experts that are trying to do brain transplants in humans. They've already done them in other animals. So what are your thoughts on that strategy? Like, and are you aware of this book and Jean Hebert's work?
So I'm not aware of that book, but the concept of, again, clearing away old senescent cells and then rebuilding new ones is something really promising because we've got stem cells in our body and it's a matter of activating them. So I do want to stress that all of this is very, it's sort of cutting edge. We don't have data to suggest that this will definitely work. I'm just excited about its potential. So the classic one is if you accidentally cut yourself, you can heal that cut. And a lot of those new cells, yes, some of them are to do with dividing existing cells that you've got, but there are some new cells that come through. So yeah, I'm excited about the potential of this, but it's so new and there's so much more work to be done to see if it will actually work.
I completely agree. And also a story we reported on Lifespan News. I promise I'm not trying to just plug the show that I host of, but it's coming up organically in this conversation. A couple of weeks ago, some research came out of Stanford that they've been working on for years that they just published that showed really, really good wound healing for not just like scars, but also things like stretch marks. I have stretch marks right here from like lifting weights. When I was in high school, I was doing powerlifting. I also have stretch marks on my back and my groin, and the groin area got like a yeast infection in like 2011. So it's not just aesthetic is my point. It can lead to, other types of health issues, which I luckily went to a dermatologist and had that resolved totally fine. And I've had better hygiene to resolve that. But I think the point that Brad is pointing out is that we can have all sorts of research that might seem like it's early stage right now, but it can really be exciting. And we want to know where to put our resources and energy into. So Brad, this is a question I normally say for the end, but since we're already, dabbling around it, let me ask the question. If you were essentially had unlimited resources, if you were like emperor of Earth or something, what would you personally be doing to try and solve the human aging problem as quickly as possible?
So I think there are two parts to the strategy that I'm interested in. The first one is trying to extend health span. So there's a lot of things that we know in humans will increase our chances of being relatively fit and healthy when we're 70. It's things like having a great diet, having regular exercise, not smoking, minimal alcohol intake, good sleep, making sure that our stress levels are at good levels. So, but equally, we haven't translated some of that data into humans. So for example, with diet, everyone's got a different strategy around what is the best diet. And the reason for all of those strategies is we don't yet know what the best diet is. And that's because it's quite difficult to run randomized controlled trials in humans over a long period of time. It's very expensive. So I would, yeah, some of the unlimited resource that I've got, I would love to actually investigate what is the best diet for humans. And unfortunately, that data will take a lot of time to get through, and it would be quite expensive to do. Because ideally, you'd want to study people for 5 or 10 years, and you'd want to have ideally a couple of thousand people within these trials, and you'd want to be trying all sorts of different diets. So that's one area that I would love to actually spend some resource in. The next one is we do have a lot of exciting molecules coming through from the lab. So, for example, NAD boosters, and there are some human trials coming through. I would ideally want to speed those processes up. And then say with NR, nicotinamide riboside, some of the trials going on now are to see in older people, if you give them NR and you combine it with exercise, will that give them even more exercise benefits? If that proves true, then hopefully you can use that as a launching pad to then mix it with other things. Will nicotinamide riboside and creatine give them even more benefit and sort of build up your supplement stack from there? But all of those things are trying to help your health span. None of them really will extend lifespan. And that's really the tricky thing. When it comes to lifespan, when I started my channel, I thought that the research around lifespan was far more advanced than what it actually is. So I was under the impression, again, when I first started my channel, that it was just a matter of time, that some of the molecules that people are really excited about, it's going to pan out in humans and we're going to be able to extend lifespan by 30, 50, 100%. But that doesn't actually look like it's going to be the case. So, some of the classic ones are metformin. So when you give metformin to C. elegans, it does extend lifespan, but the actual increase in lifespan, it's not that much in terms of percentages. And when you try and translate that into humans, we know that with metformin, if you combine metformin and exercise, you get in the way of exercise benefits. So that's why the strategy that I personally use at the moment is using the instant release metformin, and I only use that on rest days. So, and if I could exercise 6 times a week, I wouldn't take metformin at all. So that, yeah, I'm less excited about metformin in terms of extending lifespan than I was previously when I first started my channel. So it's a really tricky one to know what is the best strategy to extend lifespan. And that's why I come back to the senescence idea, because to me that seems to make sense. If you can clear away these senescent cells and then regrow new ones, that seems to be the holy grail of longevity. And fingers crossed that actually works out in humans. But then you do have to figure out which senescent cells should we be replacing, because not all of them we should be replacing or trying to remove. And then trying to stimulate the correct stem cells, if you like, to replace those old senescent cells that you've cleared away, and making sure that they don't become cancerous. So that there's a complex web that I don't think we've unraveled yet. So it's tricky to know as to which one I would put my money on as to this is going to be the longevity strategy that we should be following, because we simply don't know at this point.
Yeah, lots of good stuff in there, Brad. So one thing I want to point out real quick regarding metformin, I have basically the same strategy as you. My problem is sometimes I don't take my metformin because I plan to work out that day. And then I get busy with other stuff on the internet and I don't actually end up working out. So then I skip my metformin that day. So I got to get better at that. I'm going to start putting my workouts on my calendar and I got to get better. And then regarding what you're saying about clearing the senescent cells and replacing them, I think that's important, but I think for me personally, I don't think I put as much importance on that as what you described it. So I want to ask the question about, are you familiar with the Hallmarks of Aging, the 9 Hallmarks of Aging paper that came out in 2013?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Go on.
Well, I was just saying it's a paper. I'll link it in the description below. So basically, I've been researching this stuff since about 2006, and Aubrey de Grey really got me into it when I started watching his YouTube TED Talks and lectures and then interviews and things like that. And so Aubrey has basically said there's 7 reasons why we age, and it's all about molecular damage, and you can just basically repair all these things. It's an engineering problem. And then in 2013, this paper came out with these geroscientists, multiple geroscientists, mainly out of Spain, that said there's 9 hallmarks of aging. And then it's kind of like nerd fight. Aubrey de Grey was like, well, the 7 that I say are actually the true ones. You're merging some of them to be like 9. But like in general, the geroscience community has all kind of marched along and been like, okay, fine, 9 is cool. And Aubrey's still stuck with his 7s. And that's kind of where we're at right now. But that hallmarks of aging paper has generally thought to be very good, and it's withstood the test of time over the last, we'll call it 8 years. This is 2021 right now. That was 2013. But it's not to say that there aren't critiques of the paper. It's certainly not perfect. We have way more we need to learn. But my point is that the 9 hallmarks of aging, one of those hallmarks are senescent cells. So there's 8 other hallmarks of aging. So that's really where my question comes from. You putting an emphasis on senescent cells, and I'm just pushing back a little bit, saying like, well, that's one of the 9, and they've actually classified the 9 hallmarks of aging and of having different levels of priority, being like some being upstream, causing or contributing to other, and the 3 upstream that are the most, or senescent cells is not in that, even in that top category. So, that's just what I'm pointing out there. What's your thoughts on that? And you can push back on me if you want a little bit, but that's just my initial thoughts.
So when it comes to repairing damage, so I agree that there's, within our cells, we've got a lot of different mechanisms, say particularly with DNA repair enzymes. We do seem to reach that limit, though, of how many times our cells can divide and replicate. So obviously that's when our telomeres get shorter and shorter, and signals that our cell needs to become senescent. So if you could make one cell as healthy as possible and keep repairing its own cell components, then maybe, yes, you're correct that you wouldn't need to clear away that cell because it's already healthy. It's tricky because so much of this at this point is quite opinionated and theoretical, because we don't have these therapies that are available yet for us. But yeah, if you could figure out a way to make that, to make your human cells as healthy as possible and don't need to be replaced, then yes, you're correct. You wouldn't need to clear them away. But I suppose the devil's in the detail. How do you actually manage to do that?
We're talking about really complex, difficult stuff here. The limit you're referring to is called the Hayflick limit. It's named after Leonard Hayflick, a very prestigious gerontology scientist based out of San Francisco. He's, I believe, in his late 80s, early 90s now, still alive. So he's kind of like a godfather to some of the more younger, prestigious aging scientists right now, like David Sinclair and Aubrey de Grey and things like that. So basically, all of our cells hit the Hayflick limit at different rates, but it's on average about 50 replications of the cell before it reaches that Hayflick limit. And then the cell is supposed to undergo apoptosis, which is cell suicide. It's supposed to just basically clear itself out and kill itself. But for whatever reason, some of these just don't. They become senescent, or like zombie cells is what I like to call them, because that's really like what they're doing. They're alive. They're spewing these horrible chemicals, inflammatory cytokines, and other types of harmful chemicals that then affect our other healthy cells and turn them into bad cells. So I think senescent cells is certainly super important, but the real conundrum is, how far up or downstream is it in this problem? So I just want to touch upon one thing really quickly that you were also talking about when you were answering the massive, huge question of solving the aging problem, which is the clinical trials, how expensive they are. I don't think you used that word, but that's clearly a big problem. They're super expensive. They're very bureaucratic. They don't run long enough. They don't have enough people. That's all tied into the money. So what I see happening and what I see is going to solve this problem is going to be the free market. It's going to be entrepreneurism, big money coming into here to actually have us completely redoing the clinical trial process in humans, having it online, open source, sharing as much data as possible. That's what my company that I'm the co-founder and CEO of, called Longevity Plan, that's what a big thing that we're trying to do, I will openly share my business model with every single people, right here on the internet, because I think that this is so important, and no one company is going to be able to do this alone. We all need to share data in an open source way. And we have technologies like smartphones, iPhones, Androids and stuff where we can validate things sometimes even better than the way clinical trials are doing right now. Like you could take a video every single day if you actually take in your metformin, hold it up, put it in, swallow it, and then upload that to a database. We should be taking GrimAge and PhenoAge, DNA methylation clocks that are believed to be the most prestigious by the geron science community, to show people's age before and after, and other blood marker, biomarker tests. So all this, I'm basically saying that I think that the human clinical trial is just ready to be disrupted. It's right for it. It's ready. And we need to do that. So what are your, I just spit a lot at you, Brad. What are your thoughts on that whole idea that I'm sharing with you?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct that we've got a lot more data than we did 10 years ago. The tricky thing is who's going to be taking the placebo, because the reason why the clinical trials are run in the way that they are, as in ideally you want them placebo-controlled, is so that it tries to control for a lot of different other variables. So for example, if one person wakes up and decides, you know what, I want to take charge of my health, I want to start taking metformin because I hear that it can hopefully extend my life, they might also be doing a whole bunch of other things. They may have started, eating better, going to the gym, trying to sleep better. So with the placebo-controlled part of that equation, you can control for all of those other factors. And then you can say, okay, was it all of those other things, such as the better diet, etc., that is actually giving you those benefits? Or is it metformin? Or is it a combination of the two? So that's also going to be the tricky thing. Yes, you've got all of this data, but how do you control for all of those other variables if you don't have the placebo-controlled part?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've thought deeply about this in my company, Longevity Plan. Our other co-founders, we've talked about this a lot. What I say is that the whole population, almost all 7.9 billion of us, we are the placebo control. It's essentially because most people aren't doing much to slow, stop, or reverse aging. They might be living a healthy lifestyle. And so that's where the data collection is key here, getting people to be as transparent and honest as possible and collecting as much data with them. Because it's unethical to tell somebody, hey, you shouldn't be doing something that you perceive to be potentially helping you become more healthy. It's very difficult from a morality standpoint to build that into the human clinical trial, in my opinion. So I think the best thing you can really do is let people just transparently share what they're doing, and then use machine learning and the most advanced algorithms to then figure out with that data. And of course, you're going to need hundreds, and then hopefully thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and then hopefully millions of people to then tease out that data to figure out what has potentially synergistic effects, what could have potentially negative effects, for every single thing, not just pills you're taking, but entire lifestyle. There's facial aging technologies now, so we can take, pictures of people's face and video before and after to see how their face might be aging and not, and things like that. And so one of our partners at Longevity Plan is Dr. Oliver Zolman. He's a medical doctor, even younger than you. He's in the United Kingdom. He's 27. He's very brilliant. And he's testing all 78 organs of the body for biological aging. So my point is data is the key here, in my opinion. The more that we actually test as much data as possible before and after these clinical trials kind of just are ongoing, and the bigger they are, that's how I think we ultimately solve this problem. So feel free to push back if you disagree on any points that I stated there.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's all about the quality of data, I think, because when you have a look at, let's take tuberculosis, for example, TB. So we can, if you have a look at the chart of TB infections, and you plot that over history, there's a massive decline in the amount of TB that is prevalent. And most of that decline, it's associated with an increase in the wealth of that country or of that person. It's far later on that actually treatments come along for TB. So all before those treatments were available, the TB rates were declining because of that wealth effect. So if you've got people who can afford to upload all of that data and to get that data in the first place, that in itself is a confounder, because you don't know, are those people already living a particular lifestyle, or do they have the means to live that lifestyle that will then be different from someone who can't upload that data? So that's also the tricky thing as well. And that's why I come back to the placebo-controlled trials, is that you can control for as much of that as possible. And on that point of the ethics around it, let's continue down the metformin route. So metformin was a molecule that we were very excited about to extend, ideally, a lifespan. But coming back to the exercise issue, it does get in the way of exercise benefits, and there's been multiple human trials showing that. So if anything, in otherwise healthy people, if they take metformin, thinking that it might be actually good for them, if in reality it may actually be bad for them. So that's the thing with all of these other molecules that we've got that we're excited about. Yes, it may give us a benefit, but equally it may not. And worst case scenario, it may actually be bad for us. So that's where I think, that's where I think the value of having these placebo-controlled trials and looking at particular outcomes is really, really useful. So that would be my pushback to that.
Okay, so I think I understand what you're saying, but I want to drill down a little bit deeper. So what I was saying is that basically the whole rest of the planet, people who are not doing anything to actively slow, stop, or reverse aging by taking things like NMN or metformin, or doing stem cell or exosomes injections, stuff like that. This is the overwhelming majority of the population, people who are not doing stuff like that. Aren't they the placebo control to a certain extent? And can't we already check tons of data by getting them to sign up, for example, to Longevity Plan or any other company or any other database, a university or a government entity, whether it be in America with the NIH, and then the underneath them is the NIH. The NIH is the National Institute of Health. It's a massive organization that has 28 or 30 or something like that organizations underneath of it. One of them is the NIA, National Institute of Aging. And the NIA is actually not really studying aging much, sadly. Most of their research funding is going towards Alzheimer's, which is a whole other rabbit hole of sadness that we need to change. But my point is that couldn't any one of these entities kind of do these placebo-controlled trials and kind of tease out that data with machine learning and things like that?
So let's take the stem cell idea. So if you want to use the general population as the placebo, and then the people who are taking the stem cells as the intervention group, stem cell treatment isn't cheap. So are these potential benefits that you're getting from the stem cell treatment, is it just because those people who can afford it are getting those benefits because they can afford it, because they're financially better off compared to the people who are still uploading their data, but they can't do the stem cell treatment because they simply can't afford it? So you've got different populations that you're trying to control. So how do you know what's actually causing the effect? Is it wealth, or is it the stem cell treatment?
Right. And that's a really great point. And I 100% agree with that. And I know all sorts of data as far as how wealth affects lifespan and maximum lifespan for certain countries and stuff. So for example, the highest lived territories would be about 85 years old for male and female combined, which is Hong Kong, Macau, and Japan. So I know Hong Kong and Macau are kind of considered part of China, especially I don't want to get political with what's going on with Hong Kong right now, but they are kind of their own territories and they have studied that. So, but we can look at wealth correlations, like Macau and Hong Kong are incredibly more wealthy compared to the general population of China, which has overall, China has about 1.4 billion people, and the population is much, life expectancy is much lower in the Chinese population compared to Hong Kong and Macau isolated. So your point is very well taken. But pushing back on your point, though, we have multiple billions of people with smartphones now, and we have more and more people that will have smartphones and more people that are coming online with these smartphones. And so that was my point. What I was saying is that there is an insane amount of low-hanging fruit from a technological standpoint right now that we're just not picking up, with people having access to internet, having a smartphone, even though they might be like incredibly poor, right? So one of the things that I like to say is that I would rather be a poor American in 2021 than a king in France in the 1600s. And the reason is basically because of technology and all the things that I was saying, because even if I'm a poor American, I could probably still get Section 8 housing. I can get all the technology like the internet, a refrigerator and freezer and microwave, and be able to eat healthy foods and get access to the internet with a smartphone. Whereas like those things don't exist in the 1600s. So that's more of where I'm coming from, of collecting that low hanging fruit and then teasing out that data with machine learning and algorithms and things like that. But I think your point is still very well taken, that this has to be done right. And we have to make sure that we're not making logical fallacies here. So what are your thoughts on that long little rant that I just went on?
Yeah, so overall, I'm still very encouraged about the amount of data that we've got and the machine learning and artificial intelligence that can hopefully pull out really exciting areas that we need to actually delve into a bit more and have more research. So let's say, again, taking that stem cell approach, say that does give, what it seems from the data, to give a lot of benefits to humans. I think then it would be appropriate to confirm that finding with a placebo-controlled trial. So I'm just saying, I think, and I'm just concerned that if we run away with machine learning, we can potentially get to the wrong conclusions and, yeah, start funding these potentially expensive treatments that actually might not work, or worst case scenario, do more harm for us. So if we can, that's the part of machine learning that I'm excited about, finding potential ways that may be fruitful and then confirming them with a proper randomized placebo-controlled trial. So that's how I overall see how this can all sort of fit together and marry together.
I completely agree. And I think we might be getting to a kind of resolution here in our language, because this stuff is really complex. So what you just said there reminds me of the old saying, to a person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? Have you heard that before? And I think that's kind of summarizes what you were talking about there. We have to make sure that we're not, that we have some type of placebo here. So like, for example, I had stem cells treatments in December of 2018 in Mexico. And I did a lot of research before I did this. I documented every injection locally and the IV that I got all on my YouTube channel. And then I did updates, 1, 2, 3, 8, and 12-month updates, videos about this. And I believe that it helped me and that I got better, but I was also doing all other sorts of things because I personally, selfishly was trying to heal myself and get the most benefits out of it. So I was getting great sleep. I was doing intermittent fasting. I was doing specific exercises every single day, sometimes twice a day, that my chiropractor recommended. I got chiropractic treatment every Monday I had stem cell injections in my right ankle, knee, and shoulder. And then I also had them for male pattern baldness. And then I had IV and then placental lyophilized injections into my belly fat. So that's all that I did. And the reason I did all those videos is because I was trying to actually show as transparently as possible all the things that I'm doing, and letting my audience know that, hey, this stuff is almost certain, it's having an effect on me. You determine, what kind of effect it's having. And some comments, that came through were like, hey, like, we don't know if this works or not because you're doing all these healthy things. And I'm like, that's fair, but I was never saying that wasn't the case. I'm just trying to show you. So I think the key is transparency, right? This is a problem that we can never solve, because people are always going to do what they think is healthy for them unless they're trying to sabotage themselves. And that's a whole different conversation. It's a bad mindset for the individual to have. Also, sometimes people can report things improperly, and they can even lie, right? So that's where I think transparency is really key here, with collecting as much data as possible, having that data, and then trying to tease it out. So what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, again, I think it's the quality of data that we're sort of touching on. It's the quality of data. So yes, machine learning can help try and bridge that gap, and look at the data in ways that humans simply can't, to try and get to potential conclusions, but then I still think that those conclusions, they need to be validated properly with placebo-controlled trials. Again, otherwise I think we're just going to be setting ourselves.
Sorry, I apologize for interrupting. This is the question I need to ask. Can you define more about what you mean by placebo control? How would you create this trial and then test for it to ensure that things are truly placebo controlled by your definition of it?
So let's go through what a double-blind placebo-controlled trial actually is. So this is one of the gold standards that medicine uses to try and figure out if a particular treatment works or if it doesn't work. So this kind of bore out, I think in the 1800s, where if people had a chest infection or pneumonia, one of the accepted treatments in medicine was bloodletting. So you would try and bleed the patient to try and get rid of the infection. And that was conclusively disproven using placebo-controlled or actual trials, looking at these patients and seeing what would happen if you bloodlet them or if you just let the body try and heal itself. And they could see that bloodletting had no place whatsoever in treating pneumonia. So that went out of medicine. So that's what we tried to do with placebo-controlled trials. So what we typically do is we have two arms to the trial. So we have one arm that is having the treatment and the other arm that's having a sham or a dummy treatment. And the best form of that trial is where the investigators don't know who's taking what, and the person themselves don't know what they're taking, whether it's the actual treatment or whether it's the dummy. And then you hopefully take a large enough amount of people that are in both of these arms, and then you follow them up over a particular period of time. And that way you can truly see, is this intervention actually working when you compare it to a dummy procedure or a dummy treatment. So that's what a double-blind placebo-controlled trial is.
Right. So those are all great information. I appreciate you sharing that. So going back to my point earlier, if we were to, for example, I was trying to put together a clinical trial yesterday on just 10 humans that were receiving mesenchymal or mesenchymal stem cells, also called medicinal signaling cells by the person who named them, Dr. Arnold Kaplan, in the late 80s. He's been trying to rename them to medicinal signaling cells for the last decade. It hasn't been successful because, once something's branded, it's hard to change. But in any event, I was trying to get a clinical trial set up so that people could get their DNA methylation tests before they received the MSCs at Dreambody Clinic in Mexico. And then we settled on 3 month, 6 month, and 12 months after, right? But then what you're saying is that we'd also have to do, 10 people with the same DNA methylation clock before, 3, 6, 12 after, and also give them an injection with a placebo. That's actually, they're going to the clinic, they're getting injected, and they are just getting injected with placebo. So it essentially just be, an IV drip of water or whatever. Is that basically summarizing, if we were to do a MSC trial, what you're referring to here?
Yeah, and the key point is that the person receiving the treatment wouldn't know if they're just receiving normal saline or whether they're receiving the stem cells. And the investigators wouldn't know either. So that way you can compare. Yeah, you can compare it. So the best example of a placebo-controlled trial that I can think of, so when I used to be an orthopedic resident, so working with bones, there was quite a famous trial that was done to look at arthroscopic knee repairs. So what they did was a sham procedure. So they would put half the patients to sleep.
Right.
They would actually make cuts into their knee, and then they would sew up the cuts. So the patient would think, they wouldn't know whether they've actually had the operation,
right,
or whether it was just a simple cut. And the surgeon wouldn't see who the patient actually is either.
Right.
So these two groups were followed up, and then you could see, is these arthroscopic knee repairs actually working, or is it just the placebo effect? So, yeah.
And do you remember the results from that? Because I remember the results from that. I've researched that.
Yeah, so it was a particular form of arthroscopic knee repair, and essentially there was no difference between the two groups.
Isn't that incredible? And so
Yeah.
then it shows like how powerful the placebo effect actually is. And I've researched the placebo effect pretty thoroughly, and it's insanely powerful. It shows the power of our minds and all the chemicals and hormones that our brains produce based off our perception. And then there's the opposite of the placebo effect, which most people don't know about, because I've been asking people about this for over a decade, and most people give me a blank stare with nocebo effect. The nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect, and it shows the power of negative thoughts on your biology. And we know that, like with older couples, when one of them dies, the other one's life expectancy drops dramatically. And there's not just nocebo in there. It could also be lifestyle things, helping each other with medicines and things like that and stuff. So in any event, the point is that I think the placebo effect needs to be studied way more, as well as the nocebo effect. And that's why you just have to have a positive mindset. So how do you have a positive mindset? Watch Dr. Brad Stanfield's YouTube channel, learn about all the science that he's putting in 20 to 25 hours of research a week for each video, condensing it into 10 minutes. I mean, you're getting his expertise of 20 to 25 minutes of research every week condensed into 10 minutes. Like, how can you get better value than that, right? So, but then from what you learn, this should empower people and help that placebo effect take effect in your biology. What are your thoughts on that, Brad?
Yeah, so the placebo effect is absolutely huge. So if I can just round off what we were talking about before, the placebo effect is so massive, and that's why we need to have these placebo-controlled trials once we've got particular treatments that we're excited about, so we can actually know, is it working or is it just the placebo effect? But yeah, on the point of the placebo effect and the nocebo effect, the nocebo effect is actually something that I want to talk about, because statins have got a massive issue with the nocebo effect. So people think if I start a statin, it's going to cause me muscle problems, it's going to cause me muscle pains, and it's going to slow my thinking. And there's been a lot of trials going into this, figuring out, is this a true effect that people are getting with statins, or is it just the nocebo effect? And most of the time, it's the nocebo effect. It's not to do with the statin. So yes, there are some people who have a bad reaction to statins, and you can see that in their blood work. Their creatine kinase goes up, and you can see it. But in other people, so what they do with these trials is they give half of them the statin, half of them not, and they can see the different rates of perceived muscle pain. Overall, they're about the same. And then when you also reintroduce, when you reintroduce someone to statins who previously thought, oh, I've got muscle pains, again, it's the same thing, that only, the placebo and the statin are roughly the same as well. So yeah, the placebo-nocebo effect are huge, and they do get in the way quite a bit of trying to figure out, is this treatment working or is it causing problems?
Yeah, really great points. And I want to go back to something you just stated, not in what you said there, but previously about the clinical trials. And so first of all, I want to say thank you so much for explaining the double-blind, placebo-controlled history and why it's important. And I completely agree with that. But what my point is that with limited resources of like a small company like mine with longevity plan, and there's many other companies out trying to do similar things to what we're trying to do. There's Intervene Immune, which is co-founded and CEO and CTO is Bobby Brook, who's also started the Clock Foundation to offer GrimAge and other DNA methylation clocks. And then you have Greg Fay, who is the Chief Science Officer of Intervene Immune. You know, they've done the best they can with limited resources in their human clinical trial that came out on 3 treatments. They were giving 9 human males from 2018 to 2019, which was metformin, DHEA, and HGH, human growth hormone. And they showed biological age reversal using the GrimAge. Steve Horvath's at UCLA's most recent and accurate predictor of mortality and morbidity using this DNA methylation clock. So my point is that couldn't we just, like, I agree with you that flying everybody to Mexico or wherever said stem cell center is, injecting them with a saline placebo, doing that for half, maybe we'll say 10 people, and then the other 10 actually getting the MSCs. I agree with you that is the most accurate way to do this, but the resources and the morality of that, because the way that these trials are going right now is that most of the people are actually paying for the treatments that they're receiving themselves. That's how we were trying to set up this clinical trial last year, was basically, hey, people who are already going to get stem cells, they're already paying for it. We're coming in to add more value to them, to say, hey, we'll take a blood sample before, no cost to you. I had a wealthy person who was going to do the philanthropy to pay for the DNA methylation Grimmage clock. It was going to be 4 times, as I said, before the stem cells, 3, 6, and 12 months after. Each one was about $400. So that's, it's about $1,600 per person times 10. That's $16,000. You see how this is going up quickly. So the question is, like, with companies that are, I'll phrase it this way. Since in my opinion, the big institutions, governments, academia, in many ways, they are failing us on here, because I see this stuff as like massively obvious. That's why I'm working on this with my company. They should be doing this with the resources that they have, and they're not. So since small companies, startups like ours, have limited resources, I can't justify going the route that you've mentioned with the double-blind placebo-controlled, flying people out to wherever and injecting them with the saline, especially if they're paying. That's unethical if they're paying for that themselves. So that's the challenge really that I was coming from with my mindset. So does that make sense? And can you share some perspective on that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is the conundrum that we've got within the space at the moment, is that, it's only been relatively recently that aging has been defined as a disease. And because of that, it's been really tricky to get funding for it. One of the things that I really want to do in 2022 is set up my clinical trials as well, and hopefully do it by crowdsourcing, because that's the thing. I think there's so many people here who want to know, is this treatment actually going to give benefits? And if you can show that a particular treatment does give benefit, then you can publish that data and other people can either confirm it, and you can get that treatment out to, hopefully millions of people, and you can make a massive difference. So that's, it's a question of funding, unfortunately. But I think you do, looking at data through machine learning can get you quite far, in that we can find potential ways that will actually give us benefits. But I'm just worried that we're going to pigeonhole ourselves into thinking this particular strategy definitely works. When if you do a proper powered randomized placebo-controlled trial, maybe it doesn't, and worst case, maybe it makes things worse. So it's really hard, and that's how I personally want to try and tackle it, is crowdfunding these trials and trying to get different companies on board, so that we can actually bring some true science to this area. Because that's one of the big reasons why I started this channel anyway. I'm excited about the potential that these treatments have got. It's just I want to try and speed up this process of trying to figure out if they actually work, or if they're just going to stay in mice. So it's
beautiful. And to be clear, I 100% agree with everything you stated there, and pretty much everything you've stated in this interview. We're just talking about really complex stuff. And so you're talking about crowdsourcing. I volunteer for Lifespan.io, aka LEAF, the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, where I host, Lifespan News on their spinoff YouTube channel, X10, the LifeXtenShow. And so Lifespan.io just partnered with Ageless RX, and they announced Pearl, the first human clinical trial on rapamycin, which is really exciting. And they've had a crowdfunding goal of 125,000 USD. Last I saw yesterday, May 26, 2021, they were at $76,000. And that's just after about a week or so of launching the crowdfunding. So I'm hoping that and I'm optimistic that we'll get to the 125,000 soon. So I think your strategy on that is super great. My company, Longevity Plan, I know Leaf, we'd love to partner with you in any way possible on all your human clinical trials. So then this leads into the big question that we haven't talked about yet, or a big topic, is interoperability, right? How do we make sure that if we are doing these human clinical trials with small, lean startups or individuals like yourself, that we're actually collecting the appropriate data before and then after all of these treatments or therapies to ensure that we are sharing the data properly and we're all in accordance that the data is as accurate and important. So before I kick it to you to answer the question, I'll just say, I think that the Grim Age and the Pheno Age, Dr. Steve Horvath's clock, Grim Age, and Pheno Age, Morgan Levine, who's worked in partnership with Dr. Steve Horvath at UCLA, their DNA methylation clocks. To me, those are the gold standard right now of a test that has to be done for a human clinical trial before and after. Like, other things we can talk about is really important, but I personally believe those things are a must, or it's just kind of like low-hanging fruit that you didn't pick up. And the final thing I'll say is I have inside information. The price has come down on these. I told you last year is about 400. It's down to around 300. And I have information that this pricing will be going down dramatically within the next few months and years. So I'm really excited. This is inside information that I've recently learned. And so don't shoot me if it's incorrect, but that's what I've learned from a trusted source. So Brad, the floor is yours. I just threw a lot at you.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right that we need to make sure that whatever trial that we do will actually will actually add to all of the data that we've already got in a really positive way. So I think the way to do that is making sure that the trial is really well designed. So typically when you run a trial, you do want to have a primary endpoint, as in if you had to choose only one thing that you want to measure to see is this treatment effective or not, what is it? And that's the primary endpoint. Everything else is a secondary endpoint. And once you've figured out that primary endpoint, then you can adequately power the trial, make sure that there's enough people involved so that you can actually see a statistically relevant result. So if we take the NAD boosters, for example, yes, you can use the DNA methylation clocks. One of the things that I'm really excited for with the trials that are coming through is, again, what does NR treatment do to the exercise tolerance of older people? So you do have to select a population where you think you're going to get the most benefit, because then hopefully you can see a statistically significant difference in the treatment before and after compared to placebo. So take the NAD boosters. If you took older people and you exercise them, and the primary endpoint is to see how far can these older people run, or maybe how fast can they run 50 meters, and make that your primary endpoint. And then you can give half of them placebo and the other half an NAD booster. And you give that treatment over 12 months. Then you can say, okay, this will improve exercise tolerance in older people or not. And so a lot of it's to do with the design. And that's the thing that I really want to try and get across with the longevity space. People think, the impression that I get is that people think you can only test otherwise healthy people. But in actual fact, you can get an indication as to whether these molecules are going to work if you test them on so-called diseased populations. Because in theory, if you've got a diseased population and you're giving them a molecule that's going to benefit healthy people, you should be seeing massive benefits in diseased populations. So that's why if you can choose the correct population and you can clearly define what your endpoint is, then you can actually give relevant clinical data that can then steer your decision-making process as to which molecules will help us and which ones need further investigation.
Okay, beautiful. So I agree with what you're saying, but I want to clarify a couple things. So I agree an endpoint needs to be there, but it doesn't mean that the study can't just keep going. So it'd be like never ending, but we had an endpoint where like that phase of the study ends and we release the data, report it, share it. But that's what I mean. I think that we have the technological capability now where we can essentially have these never ending human clinical trials that just keep on going in that sense. And then the other point that you made, I'll let you respond to that in just a second. The other point that you made is about having older or sicker people. I think is less healthy people is how you phrase it. I completely agree with that. But I think that we should also at the same time, like for example, if there's 100 people in the trial, maybe 90 of them are the less healthy people, older, but then maybe 10 of them for like spermidine, for example, doing a human clinical trial on spermidine, are people who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are essentially younger, healthier, just to see what type of effects we have on them. Because I'll share another piece of inside information. I won't share the name of the company, but I've just been entered into a human clinical trial that should be starting soon, around June or so, for spermidine. And I've agreed to do this. And so part of that, I'll be interested to see. This is not my company, or I'm not involved. I'm just kind of part of this group. And they had so many people they were going to do, and I raised my hand virtually and I got there. So I will be interested to see how they are doing this study. And we have experts in here, and I will raise my opinion to make sure that it's done properly. But the question still comes down to, if they don't want me to take certain things, how can they prove that? Because I can lie. Humans can lie. I don't intend to lie. I won't lie. I'll be transparent. But how do you tease that out? So how do you, I know I just threw a few different things at you, but please, the floor is yours.
So yeah, coming back to that idea of a never-ending placebo-controlled trial. So let's say the NAD boosters in older people does improve exercise tolerance after 12 months. And that's double blind, so the people who were within the trial didn't know what they were taking. After that data is released, the people within that trial who are taking the placebo, they're probably unlikely to still be taking the placebo, because they'll look at the data and say, well, hang on, I should be taking an NAD booster. So then you get into problems with how you're controlling the trial, because your so-called placebo group, they're not going to be taking placebo anymore, because they've got data to suggest that, well, let's take an NAD booster and I'm going to get these benefits as well. So yeah, you can't release your data in a placebo-controlled trial too early, because ideally you want the placebo-controlled group to actually be taking placebo and not mixing in other stuff. So that's sort of my pushback on that.
I agree. Yeah, really good point.
Yeah.
Then I talked about like older people being like less healthy, and then saying like maybe a certain percentage, like 10% or younger people, like for spermidine, for example, to see if it has what type of, potential benefits on people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm 36 chronologically. So what are your thoughts on that idea?
So with the trials that you do, ideally you want, the idea with a randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trial is that both groups, ideally they're as similar as possible. So they've got similar baselines. So if you start having one group of people that are healthier or at a different baseline than the rest of them, that can confound your trial. So to be honest, it would be better to run a separate trial if you wanted to test your theory on otherwise healthy people. But overall, my point is that, again, taking the NAD booster thing, if you can show that NAD boosters do improve exercise tolerance in older people after 12 months, then you can progressively go back and say, okay, well, it worked in older people. Is it going to work in middle-aged people? Is it going to work in younger people? Is it going to work even better if you pair it with other molecules such as creatine? So it's a stepwise approach, and I think it's very tempting to sprint and get ahead of ourselves. But until we actually figure out is what we think we know correct, or is it incorrect, and then moving in that fashion, because then you can really start to get a momentum. So yeah, that would be my pushback to that you want your baselines to be as similar as possible, and that's the whole concept of randomizing the population that you're trying to test.
Okay, very insightful information. And I know the clock's ticking and you have to go soon, and you've been very gracious with your time, and my audience really appreciates it. I'm sure. I know I appreciate it. So Brad, would love to just kind of end with any final thoughts, any things that you want to plug, if you have teasers for certain things that might be coming up on your channel that you want to share, things that you're interested in, ideas that you're working on, any other things that you want to end it. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I really appreciate the podcast. It was a lot of fun. The things that I'm currently working on, or the things that I'm particularly excited about, is the new diabetic medications that are coming through. So we've got GLP-1 receptor agonists. So there was a study that I'm just about to do a video on that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So what they did is they gave, so it was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, and they were looking at weight loss. And so they took overweight people who weren't diabetic, and they gave half of them GLP-1 receptor agonists, and the other one, it was sham injections. So, and they randomized it, so it was a placebo-controlled, double-blind trial. And the weight loss in the group that had the GLP-1 receptor agonists was just mind-boggling. So how this medication works is that it tricks the body into thinking that you're fuller for longer. But the key point here is that in previous medications that have tried to work on the hunger receptors, it's actually caused problems with increasing diabetes, or it's caused problems with heart disease. Whereas these medications, the initial indication for why they were being used in clinical practice was for treatment of diabetes. And it just happens that weight loss seems to be a really awesome side effect of this medication. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also excited about the potential of SGLT2 inhibitors. So this is a medication, again, that's used in diabetics that makes people pee out sugar or pee out glucose. And by doing that, we seem to be getting awesome benefits for the heart and for the kidneys. So I'm particularly excited about those two treatments, and because, again, you've got a diseased population, and those molecules seem to be helping that population in a huge way. And again, future plans, I really want to run my own clinical trials. Particularly, I do want to start building up evidence for supplements that are mixed together. So I've mentioned, NAD boosters and creatine quite a lot, because we've got good human data showing that creatine does help with exercise performance and particularly high intensity training.
I've seen your video on creatine.
Yeah.
It's a recent video. I'll plug it here. So check the show notes below. I love it. I take creatine. I think it's helping me. My prodrome scan video from my last video told me I should be taking creatine. So I'm glad I added that in for the last couple of weeks. And I think I'm doing better. So I apologize to cut you off, but I'll link it. Definitely watch Brad's video on creatine. Brad, please continue.
Yeah. So I'm just really curious to see if nicotinamide riboside works in older people with the exercise tolerance, will adding in other supplements such as creatine help them as well and give them even more benefits? And hopefully, if we've got that data coming through, then we've got a good evidence base to say, yes, these supplements together will actually give us even more benefits than just one by itself.
The synergistic
I'm really excited
effects.
for those things.
Yeah, the synergistic effects. And that's where I come back to where I've said multiple times during this podcast that the key is collecting as much data as possible from people and having them be transparent and trusted. So that's a key thing that we're going to focus on with Longevity Plan, our company, is finding people that are already trusted in the longevity community. We know that they're good faith actors, and then getting them to share and give us as much data about themselves as possible, about, their age, their any type of health information. It will have to be, GDPR collected or controlled as much as possible. Amazon Web Service, AWS, Amazon Web Services, so that the data has integrity and so that it's not going to be hacked and things like that. And trust is going to be key. And so that we can make sure that we're not missing any low-hanging fruit of things like, oh, we did all this, but then found out after the fact that this person was taking creatine or taking spermidine or taking any type of thing that we weren't aware of that could have affected the data. And so obviously, if you've gotten this far in this podcast, you see how complex this stuff is and what we're thinking about to make sure that we do these things as correctly as possible. What are your thoughts about that, Brad?
Yeah, 100%. That we do need to try and control for these so-called confounding factors as best as possible. So that I think one of the key things that we've really tried to focus in on is the quality of data during this podcast. So for the first trial that I would love to do, if it proves out that NR is good for exercise in older people, combining that with creatine, that would be the first clinical trial that I'd love to do. So hopefully, if that data does come through with nicotinamide riboside, that would be the first trial that I'd want to do. So that's kind of the future as to what I want to do. So it's those new diabetic medications and running my own clinical trials. That's my future and what I'm excited for at this point.
That's really exciting, Brad. And again, we'd love to partner with you in any way. We're going to try and make our data as open source as possible. Obviously, the individual should own and retain their own data. And this stuff is really complex, but we want to, we're anxious to partner with as many of, the top players, the serious people like yourself, Dr. Brad Stanfield, so that we can all work together in this type of decentralized open source way to really get clear data and not, hammer and nail type issue like we were talking about before with for every person with a hammer, the problem it looks like a nail type thing. We have to make sure that we're teasing out that type of stuff and not having the machine learning leading us down a wormhole of like confirmation bias type things. So really important stuff. Okay, so final thoughts from you, because I know you have to run.
I've made some relatively controversial videos recently, and I just wanted to let people know I haven't done that purposely. All I've tried to do is present the data and present it in as best a way as I possibly can. And I've just tried to let myself be led by what the data shows. So one of the things that I made a video on was why I've recently stopped NMN. The sole reason why I did that was because I'm 29, and I've at this point I don't see any benefit from the data of boosting my NAD higher than what a 25-year-old would. So I still take nicotinic acid, and I do a few other things to try and make sure that my NAD levels are well maintained. But when I reach my mid-30s, that's when I'll be putting in NR or NMN again to help support my NAD. The other video that I recently made was about resveratrol. And again, I just tried to focus in on what the research shows around resveratrol and the timeline of events of resveratrol. So I hope that your viewers or the people watching this can look at those videos and then appreciate them for what they are. That I've personally just tried to focus in on what the research shows as opposed to anything else. Yeah.
I'll just back you up, Brad. I've watched both of those videos. I completely agree with you. Clearly, to me, you are a good faith actor and your intentions were good. And it totally makes sense to me. People need to realize that you are 29 years old. You're not in your 30s, 40s, 50s or something. And so that's the key for me. Anybody who's going outside of that and even insinuating that you are not a good faith actor is just like ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. So I haven't seen all your videos, but I've seen those too. And I have a lot more on my watch later playlist. So I'm going to watch them all. You're doing fantastic work. And each one of your videos, in my opinion, are continuing to get better, which is really exciting. And so, I take NMN every day by a company called Novos. I'm 36. I just started in February 2021. I think it's helping. I feel good, but it's hard to tell this stuff because I do so many other things as well too. And I watched your video about spermidine and I looked into maybe purchasing it, but I didn't. Instead, I just started eating more broccoli because I know there's a lot of, it's never ending. If you have a growth mindset and you're in this stuff, it's just so exciting every single day, the things we're learning and getting better. And so we just want to have that momentum and keep it rolling. And so one of the best ways to do that is by watching your channel. So I really appreciate you coming on. Infinite gratitude to you. And I'm so excited about things that you have upcoming.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.
All right. See you guys next time.